And so you've probably heard quite a few lies about France, one of which is that it's a great nuclear success. And this myth has been put about so effectively that it's even been repeated in some really high quarters. In fact, quite recently, there was a man who I understand is very intelligent, named President Barack Obama, who said that France and Japan had done nuclear safely and effectively. And, and then he said something else, actually, and my children in the room, so they're going to cringe when I say this, but he said that we would be stupid if we didn't follow their example. Now, my kids are not allowed to use that word about anybody at all, ever. But President Obama said we would be stupid if we didn't do nuclear like France and Japan. And, because my kids are in the room, although one's sleeping, I'm going to resist the temptation to ask myself, how could he be so wrong? Because he is wrong, and he's wrong for a lot of reasons. First of all, the so-called success of France's nuclear system is based on one statistic, which is that they get 80% of their electricity from nuclear power. Wow, that's a success apparently. All that equates to is a heck of a lot of nuclear waste. Because if you put all your nuclear eggs in one basket, that's what you're going to get. It's not really, I don't think, the definition of success. Unless, of course, they were energy independent, which they must be, right? All that nuclear power, they must be energy independent. Well, afraid not, because, of course, nuclear power should actually be called by the name of a fuel which fuels it, just like solar energy is, and coal power and wind power. Why isn't it called uranium power? That's what it is. This word nuclear sort of neutralizes everything, so you forget what it's really about. And so, of course, France imports 100% of its uranium because it doesn't mine uranium anymore. Now, they did mine uranium. They had 210 uranium mines in France, and they're all abandoned, and actually you can walk around on them and there are no signs whatsoever warning you off. I walked on one a couple of years ago with a huge Geiger counter, and the counts were going off the scale. There were hot spots everywhere, and there wasn't even a beware, keep out sign. Kids picnicked there, people rode their bikes through there, and the waste, which no one ever talks about. This is the waste that's never quantified. The waste from uranium mines, the tailings and all the rocks and radioactive mess that's left behind. Where's that? Well, it's been paved into children's playgrounds in France. It's been used for parking lots, for soccer stadiums and for ski resorts. And this only came out this year in a revelatory news documentary which actually squeaked by Sarkozy's censors and appeared on national television in France, because they're not told a whole heck of a lot, the French, about their own nuclear system. So, well, that doesn't sound like such a success after all to me. So obviously, though, they're awash in nuclear energy, and so they must have their lights on all the time. It must be great living in France with all that nuclear power. Well, actually, no, they import electricity because they have so much electric heat in France that their 58 reactors can't deliver what they need. So what do they import? They import coal-fired electricity from Germany in the wintertime to keep their fires burning, their electric fires burning. So much for that, Well, one of the other successes, I guess, is their waste problem. You've probably heard that they recycle their nuclear waste, so they have no waste problem whatsoever. Well, where I come from, that would be called a whopper. I mean, it's a lie, right? But actually, it's not completely a lie, because they do recycle their waste. They recycle it into the DNA of their kids and their kids' kids. That's what they do with their nuclear waste, because they reprocess it. And luckily, Kevin has given a quick snapshot explanation of what reprocessing is, but it's fundamentally the dirtiest end of the nuclear fuel chain. And so how they recycle their waste after they do this chemical separation is they pump a whole lot of so-called but very misnamed low-level nuclear waste into what we call in England the English Channel, and what they call in France La Manche. But it's a small body of water, and it's now got a seabed that qualifies as radioactive waste because of the amount of crap that they pump out, that nuclear waste. And they're allowed to do this. They get around this because there's a law now against dumping barrels of nuclear waste at sea. You cannot dump nuclear waste into the sea as long as you dump it off a ship. But if you dump it through a pipe from the Le Havre processing plant, that's okay. So, you're probably not surprised to learn that there are a couple of leukemia clusters downwind and downstream from the Le Havre processing site. The other thing they discharge as part of their recycling process is radioactive gases, namely krypton-85 and xenon. and they pump all the krypton-85 that they generate out into the atmosphere, which means that the communities around Le Hague breathe radioactive air all the time, permanently. And as Cindy has just explained, you know, chronic low-dose inhalation or ingestion of radionuclides gives you cancer. So they pump this krypton out. In fact, they pump out more krypton-85 gas in 1 year than was released by all the atomic above-ground tests that ever happened on planet Earth. There are about 500, I think, of them over several decades. More krypton-85 in 1 year out of Le Hague than of 500 atomic tests. Well, that's not such a great success either, but they're allowed to do that. So what else happens to this waste that they recycle? Well, there's about 1% of that waste that's plutonium. Most of that is sitting in Coca-Cola-sized cans, 10,000 or more, at Le Hague. Well, you know what plutonium is, right? So that's a pretty juicy temptation, I would think, for somebody with an airplane or a good sabotage team. Those of you that saw Meltdown have an idea of what could happen to that plutonium. They do recycle a tiny bit of this plutonium. It's made into a fuel for a particular kind of reactor that there are about 20 of, and you can only load about 8% plutonium into this fuel, and of course, it's recycled. Well, not really, because all reactors, when they fission, make plutonium. So some plutonium goes in, and some plutonium goes out, so what you're left with, about the same amount of plutonium you started with. The only problem is that the fuel that comes out of those reactors can't be reprocessed. So that's waste. 95% of the waste from processing is uranium, and some of that is sitting at Kirlat, which is in the south of France, so it has to travel across the whole country, and some of it is shipped, as we've discovered now, to Siberia, where, if you go on Google Earth, you can see it sitting in storage cans outside, unprotected. This is uranium hexafluoride, depleted uranium hexafluoride, just sitting there. This was also exposed on a television channel out there about 2 months ago. It caused furor in France. So this is what happens. So where does France then get the fuel for its reactors to make all this lovely waste that they so-called recycle? Well, they import the uranium from Niger, which is a country in Africa, where Areva, which is the government-owned nuclear industry in France, has mined for 40 years. And what they've done there is leave contaminated water, radioactive dust everywhere, piles of tailings, radioactive metals in the villages that are used by villagers that have been tested to be incredibly highly radioactive. There are 2 hospitals that Areva owns, and only the mine workers can go there, and they have never once diagnosed anyone with a disease related to uranium mining. What they tell the patient that they have malaria or AIDS, they lie to them, rather than tell them that they have a mining-related illness, because that would reflect very badly on Areva. Now, these are mostly poor, nomadic Tuareg people in the middle of a desert. This is the Sahara Desert, which is getting more desertified. There's not much water there to begin with. Areva, which is French government-owned, has just grabbed the contract to open the biggest uranium mine in Africa. So they're going to go on basically desecrating this country. I bet you've never heard about this. I mean, why would you? Who's going to tell you this? But to me, this is, here's another French word, terrorism. That's an origin of a French word, and I think that Areva, ought to be described as a terrorist, committing these sorts of crimes against humanity. They're not on the US terrorist watch list, but Cat Stevens is. So we can all sleep well at night, I think, because of that. So that, in a nutshell, is the great, French success story. I could tell you a lot more, but I think my 5 minutes are already up. But I do think that we cannot let our president and everybody from him down get away with repeating vacuous sound bites that they've been fed by the industry without looking behind the curtain and saying, wait, is this really true? I think I want to ask a few more questions. And we can demand that they ask them. And one way that we can do that actually is if you'll sign our letter to President Obama that's on the computer over there. You have to be able to touch type because Kevin has worked so hard on that computer that most of the keys have no letters on them anymore. But if you can touch type, put your name on there and tell the President that nuclear power is a violation of human rights, it has no business in a climate bill, and he must not stand up and say we can do it safely and efficiently like France. He must stand up and say, we mustn't do it at all, ever, for our kids' sake and for future generations. Thanks.